Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's frosty meeting of the Committee of Adjustments. This is a meeting to consider applications for minor variance and consents held under the authority of the Planning Act of Ontario. Please keep in mind the intent of this process is to review the proposal that is before us, listen to the evidence, and then make a decision. This process is not intended to be used to resolve any concerns or disputes that may exist between the town, individuals, or organizations. If a request for a deferral is made, the committee grants such a request. The committee, after consultation with the Secretary-Treasurer, will set a new hearing date. No further notice will be provided unless there are changes to the application. In order for us to conduct an effective and efficient hearing, we have adopted the following process. The owner or authorized agent will be given the opportunity, if so desired, to briefly explain to us the basis of the application and answer any questions that may arise out of the hearing. A maximum of 5 minutes will be provided for this presentation. You will need to state your full name and address for the record. Any materials submitted to the committee for viewing will remain the property of this committee. Any submissions beyond 5 minutes will be at the discretion of the committee. All persons attending the hearing who wish to support or oppose the application must also state their full name and address for the record, and a maximum of 5 minutes will be provided to make your presentation. All remarks and questions are to be directed to the chairperson of the committee. Any submissions beyond the 5 minutes will also be at the discretion of the committee. If there are several speakers sharing the same point of view, we ask that you select a spokesperson to present the group's opinion. We do want to hear everyone's views, however, covering the same points will not advance your case. The owner or agent will then be provided with a further 5 minutes to respond to comments made by interested parties and answer any questions from the committee members. If the owner or agent has a concern found in staff reports, particularly with the proposed conditions, this will be your opportunity to advise us. The matter will then be taken into committee for a decision, and this will mark the end of all discussions. Once the committee makes an oral decision, any person desiring a copy must file with the Secretary-Treasurer at this meeting a written request for notice of the decision. A green sheet is provided for this purpose in the back of the room. Please make note that you must make a written request in order for you to be included on the list that is used by the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal for the giving of any subsequent notice of any appeal. Written notice of the committee's decision will be mailed no later than 10 days for minor variances and 15 days for consent applications to the applicant, owner, or agent, and any other person who has filled a written request for such a notice. If you do not agree with the committee's decision, you may appeal this to the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. The last date to appeal the decision to the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal will be noted on the decision. If no appeal is received within the prescribed time frame, the decision of the committee becomes final and binding, and the Secretary-Treasurer will then notify the applicant through written correspondence. People attending this committee meeting tonight should be courteous and respectful to the members of the committee, the town staff, and other people in attendance tonight. Tonight's meeting will be video recorded and available for future viewing on the town's YouTube channel, and we ask that the cellular phones be switched off or at least maintained on silent because they do interfere with the meeting's audio system. Thank you. So we have no regrets this evening. Do I have any declarations of pecuniary interests? I see none. Thank you. I will now take deferral and withdrawal of application requests. The earliest deferral date will be February 26th, or if the material is presented to the Secretary-Treasurer, she'll be giving you a subsequent date. Anybody that would like to refer or deny? Yes, okay. Ma'am, your hand went up first, please. CAV 00. Is that the Elmhurst one? Sorry, I can't hear you when you're all the way up there, but is it for the Elmhurst Avenue address? Okay, I'm going to have to say no to that request because we do have several people here in attendance for the Elmhurst, and we do have several letters of objection. Who is here for the Elmhurst application? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, so there's quite a few of you, and I can't push an application that's at the end of the agenda to the beginning knowing that there's going to be a lengthy discussion on it. It's not fair for everyone else who's on the agenda this evening. So but I thank you for your request. Who else had their hand up for a deferral? Sure, Mr. Nelson, I believe you're here for...
Evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
Good evening.
Application A005/2019.
Yes.
Request for deferral from the Region of Halton supported by the Town of Oakville staff. I will agree to that deferral. Mr. Hassan has indicated he will set up the required meeting with regional staff and Town of Oakville staff to deal with the number of issues identified by Region of Halton. I would just request that the deferral fee be waived.
Okay. And we do have that request from staff that the application be deferred, so I will accept that. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? Or the request for a deferral, I apologize. Any questions of Mr. Nelson at this time? Okay, so Mr. Nelson, all those in support of a deferral? Okay, your application has been deferred and your application fee for the deferral has been waived.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
Thank you. Okay, so we will proceed with the first item on our agenda, which is a consent application, B1812-1707 at 1316 Lakeshore Road. Good evening. Your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, Madam the Chair and the member of committee. My name is Gurdev Singh of 167 Dominica Drive, Brampton.
Good evening, Mr. Singh. Who is here for application B1812 at 1316 Lakeshore Road East? Can I see a show of hands? I see none. Mr. Singh, I believe that this application was here before us, but you are again here because one of the variances had lapsed. And
yes, indeed.
We're aware of the application. Are there any questions of Mr. Singh at this time? Is there anything that you'd like to say to the committee?
Nothing. As you know that it's mostly complete except one condition, which the staff is working on it. So I would once again request the approval on this application.
Okay, and you're familiar with all the conditions that were set forth in the staff report?
Yes, in the appendix A.
And you're amicable to them?
Yes.
Okay. If there are no questions of Mr. Singh at this time, I'm prepared to entertain a motion with respect to this consent application that is supported by town staff, and it's really here because of a technical lapse of one of the variances. Mr. Charlebois?
Madam Chair, having conducted my site visit and reviewed the applicant's written submission as well as the town's written staff report, which I note that they are in support of this. Also noting that there are no objections from the public, either written or oral. I do find that this is a pretty straightforward application for consent. Sorry, I'm going to make one exception to that because I did forget that there was one letter of objection.
Yes, thank you.
Which I spoke too quickly. I will comment that the letter of objection was quite well written. It addressed driveways, and I feel that the town, in its response, was able to deal with that matter to my satisfaction. So as such, I'm prepared to put forward a motion in support of this consent, basically saying, having considered the matters set out under section 5124 of the Planning Act as amended, I believe that the application conforms to the official plan and zoning bylaws, and I'll recommend that the application be approved subject to the provision that the applicant must fulfill all of the conditions in Schedule A.
Thank you.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Charlebois. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Mr. Singh, your application has been approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
So the first item on our agenda with respect to variance applications is item CAV 004 of 2019 at 306 Maple Grove Drive.
Good evening, members of the committee, Madam Chair. My name is Richard Mann. I'm the architect for the owners at 306 Maple Grove Drive. I live at 153 Woodhaven Park Drive in Oakville.
Good evening, Mr. Mann. Who is here in attendance for application CAV 004 of 2019 at 306 Maple Grove Drive? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, I see none. Mr. Mann, this is your time to address the committee. Feel free to take us through your application, but we have done our site visits and we're well aware of the recommendations of staff, and we are prepared to take this into motion. If anyone has a question of Mr. Mann at this time, I see none. So go ahead, sir.
No, I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Okay. So if there are no questions of Mr. Mann at this time, is a recommendation ready? Okay. Mr. Flemington, go ahead, sir.
Madam Chair, I have conducted my site visit and have reviewed the applicant's written submission, noting that there were no letters in support or not in support of. Also having taken into account the comments this evening and the staff report, I would like to move a motion in support of the application, approving it as applied for with the conditions that the proposal be constructed in general accordance with the site plan and the elevations dated October 2nd, 2018. And subject to the condition that the approval will expire 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction.
Thank you, Mr. Flemington. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I see none. Mr. Mann, you're familiar with the conditions and you're amicable to them?
I am, yep.
Thank you. All those in support? Okay, your application has been approved, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
007. Okay, application CAV 007 of 2019 at 249 Elton Park Road.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Jason Heater from Hicks Design Studio.
Hello, Mr. Peter. Who is here for application CAV 007 of 2019 at 249 Elton Park Road? I see none. Mr. Peters, you are welcome to address the committee. This is for a small increase in a proposed new story with an increase in residential floor area, but you were here before us before, and
That's correct.
in 2018, and you've done some revisions and worked with town staff.
Yes, we've worked closely with planning staff in order to reduce that variance as much as possible. Yeah.
Very well. Are there any questions of Mr. Peters at this time? I see none. Is there anything else that you would like to add? We are prepared to take this matter into committee.
No, I don't think there is. I'm willing to answer any questions, of course. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Mr. Talowski, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'll be happy to move that the application be approved as applied for. It's always good to see things coming back with a lesser degree of a variance. With the changes, I'm satisfied. Satisfies the test of the Planning Act. I'd make that approval subject to the dwelling being built in general accordance with the plans dated October 25th, and that a building permit issue within 2 years, and I'd note that there's no input from the neighborhood on this file.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Rosky. Is there any discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved. Thank you, Mr. Peters.
Thank you.
Application CAV 008 of 2019 at 261 Winford Place.
Good evening. My name is Scott Shedden from the Scott Group. I'm the agent representing the owner. We're the design builder for the project.
Good evening. Sorry, I didn't get your last name.
Shedden?
Shed?
Shedden.
Shedden, okay.
Yeah.
Good evening, Mr. Shedden. Who is here for application CAV 008 of 2019 at 261 Winford Place? I see none. Okay. Mr. Shedden, your face is not very familiar to me, so I am assuming this is the first time before us?
First time here. Usually I'm in the crowd applying for things. So yeah, this is our first time representing the owner in this case.
Very well.
I'm very familiar with the process.
Okay, so it's your time. You can take us through the applications. We've done our site visits. We're familiar with the application, and town staff is in support of your second-story addition and the existing non-conforming accessory structure that you have in addition. Are there any questions of Mr. Shedden at this time? So if you have nothing further to add, we can take this matter into committee. It's up to you.
Yep, we're good. Nothing further to add. Thanks.
Very well, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Hardcastle, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a requested variance for a fairly minor second-story addition over the existing garage and to acknowledge the existing accessory structure setbacks. Having reviewed the materials, including the staff report, and undertaken my site visit, I'm satisfied that the resultant variances are minor in nature, and accordingly I'll put forward a motion of approval, subject to two conditions. The first being that the addition be built in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevations dated January 4th, 2019, and the second being our standard condition with respect to the expiration of the variance should a building permit not be issued within 2 years. I would note that there were no materials submitted in support or objection to the application.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Application CAV 009 of 2019 at 202 Tecumseh Crescent. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Lucy Shaw. I represent LKS Consulting Inc. We provide drawings for the client. I'm here on behalf of the client and to answer any questions which you may have.
Very well. Am I pronouncing your name correctly? Shaw?
Shaw, S-H-A-W.
Okay, Shaw. Ms. Shaw, thank you. Your address, please, for the record?
1190 Concession 8 West, Puslinch, Ontario.
Do you need a postal code or are you good? Do your postal code, please?
N0B2J0.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Who is here in application CAV 009 of 2019 at 202 Tecumseh Crescent? I see. Oh, you're here. Are you the applicant or in opposition or support?
He's the applicant.
He is the applicant. Okay, you're fine.
He's the owner.
You're fine. I just needed to know if anyone was here of interest in your application. Thank you, sir. Okay. Ms. Shaw, are you familiar with our process? If you have anything further to add with respect to your application, this will be the time to advise us.
No, I have nothing to add.
Are there any questions of Ms. Shaw at this time? I see none. If you're satisfied with the comments and staff report and the conditions set forth, we are ready to take this matter into committee.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Charlebois, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, having conducted my site visit, reviewed the applicant's written submission as well as the town's written staff report, noting that the town is in support of this particular application. Also taking into account that there have been no questions or submissions from the public, either orally or in written form. I find that this particular application is fairly straightforward, and therefore I'm prepared to make a motion in support of the variances as presented here tonight, finding that they do meet the four tests under the Planning Act, and making them subject to two conditions. One, that the addition be built in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevations dated August 30th, 2018, and further subject to the condition that this approval will expire 2 years from the date of this decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction, and in cases where a building permit is not required, that the proposed scope of work has not been fully completed.
Thank you, Ms. Are there any discussions on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved. Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Application CAV 011 of 2019 at 180 Mendel Court.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Matthew Devick. I'm the owner of 180 Mendel Court.
Good evening. Good evening, Mr. Devick. Who is here for application CAV 011 of 2019 at 180 Mendel Court? I see none. Mr. Devick, you're applying for a front yard setback for your new front porch and a yard patio and second-story addition.
Yeah.
We are familiar with your application. Is there anything further that you'd like to add? Or?
I was wondering, it's more of a question. I had a last-minute conversation with my architect, and there is a slight possibility that we might put the rear porch might be an extension to the house. So what I wanted to ask is that can the approval be subject to that it complies with the zoning instead of the site plan submitted?
That would be a question for planning staff.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, basically the wording of the condition would be in general conformity with the plans as submitted, and as long as the building permit plans comply with the zoning bylaw, it would be permitted.
Okay.
Can I have that language
Written?
Written, yes.
You can provide us with that for the condition, and it will go on the final submitted approval.
For sure. Okay, thank you.
And you'll get a written copy of that once the 10 days have lapsed for appeals.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, 20 days. Okay. Are there any questions of Mr. Devick at this time? Any questions, committee members? No? Okay, thank you. If you're ready, we can take this matter into committee now.
Okay, yeah.
Very well. Mr. Flemington, are you ready?
Madam Chair, having conducted my site visit and having reviewed the applicant's written submission, as well as the town's written staff report, which I note that is in support of, and also noting that there were no letters in support or in opposition of this application, I am willing to move a motion in support of the application as applied for, subject to the condition that it be the porch and the patio in addition be built in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevations dated December 6, 2018. And do I have to add the other comments? No, I don't? Okay. Okay. And as well, subject to the condition that the approval will expire 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction of the porch and patio.
So just to clarify, the condition as read is acceptable with regard to the applicant's concerns?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, as long as it doesn't trigger any additional variances, it would be in general accordance with the plan, so.
That's fine. Okay,
thank
that's understood.
Okay.
And this is videotaped, so
Okay.
you've got proof.
Okay, thank you
Okay.
very much.
Any discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, the recommendation has been approved. Okay, so we are looking now at application CAV 012 of 2019 at 512 Pine Grove Road. Good evening.
Good evening, committee. My name is Rajinder Chaku. I am architect of this project, and I am representing today 512 Pine Grove Road, town of Oakville.
Very well. Good evening, Mr. Shako. Who is here in attendance for CAV 012 of 2019 at 512 Pine Grove Road? Okay, I see none. Mr. Shako, you're going to have to take us through your application. As you're aware, town staff is not in support of 2 of the 3 variances that this application has submitted.
That's correct. Yeah, we are aware of this. But in that instance, I have a few things to...
Okay, and I will ask you to speak clearly into the microphone because it's very difficult to hear you up here.
Okay. The variance 2, which is a garage which is protruding more than required by the zoning bylaw. Zoning has bylaw is only 1.5 meters, while as we are proposing 2.44 meters. Now, in this instance, we could have a front setback about a meter or 1.5 meters, what we have right now, so that it doesn't, it doesn't come closer to the road, and that was one of the objections from the planning department, that it will come closer. So, in that respect, we would like to take it away from the road and, front setback. We would increase the front setback in that instance. That's for the number 1. Number 2, variance.
Okay. I need a clarification. Are you saying that you are changing this variance?
No, we would, this is our, we would not to change this variance, but overall, we would just place the house away from the road, like the objection is that because of this 2.4 meters, we are bringing the garage closer to the road, while as our reply, we would like to solve this problem by putting the whole house away from the road and increasing the front setback.
Okay, here's the dilemma is we can't change the variances without proper submitted plans and drawings. So for you to make that change, that will require a significant change to your drawings, right? You're going to set the entire house back and there will be changes to those drawings. And for us to do that, or for us to actually accept those changes, we have to see those drawings before us. So this is why we ask for deferral requests to be handled in the beginning of our meeting, because without those plans, we cannot proceed with the changes that you're requesting.
Well, then we will go ahead with this, whatever we have here, so we will go ahead with this.
I'm not
we will not go for deferral. We will not go for deferral.
You're not going to go for a deferral?
No.
So is it your position that you are maintaining the house in its location and you want us to proceed with the application as submitted?
Well, we will definitely, when we submit the application for the building permit, we will adhere to the zoning bylaw, that is 1.5 meters. So we can remove this variance and, kind of delete this variance so that we have our building permit application submitted with only 1.5 meter setback from the garage, and which will meet zoning bylaw.
So you are removing variance number 2 right now?
Right.
We are deleting it?
Yes.
Variance number 2, which is the projection of the... I have a question for planning staff. Would that be acceptable to you, or you will still require to provide plans that shows that that projection has been removed, correct?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, that's absolutely correct.
Okay. Would it be acceptable to you if we took the application as it stands but deleted variance number 2 with the condition that he submits the plans accordingly, like within the next day or so?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the committee, to a degree, it would also affect variance 1 being the floor area for the private garage, depending on the reduction that's made.
Oh, yes, that's true. Okay. We won't be able to deal with your application with those changes without submitted plans that support them because of the domino effect that it has on the other variances, as you've heard from staff right now. So really, your only option is to proceed with the application as it is,
Right.
or request a deferral.
No, we will proceed it as it is.
Okay. Are there any questions? Do you want to continue your thought process for variance number 3 so that you have continued your presentation, and then we can ask you questions following that?
See, if we get the variance number 1, then accordingly we won't ask for 2 and 3. Then once we get variance number 1, we will definitely bring our plans and designs accordingly. You know, wherever we have to reduce our areas and bringing in line with the zoning bylaw, we can do that.
So basically, you're asking me to remove variance number 2 and 3. You're completely deleting them from your application, and you're asking us to consider this application with only variance number 1.
Number 1, that's right.
Okay. So variance number 2 and 3 have been deleted, and we are only looking at this application with your request for variance number 1. Are there any questions of Mr. Shaku at this time, or planning for that matter?
Right. No questions right now.
Sorry?
You are asking me?
Yes, I'm asking the committee if they have questions for you.
Okay. Thanks.
Are there any questions? I see none. Okay, if you have nothing further to add, we are going to take this matter into committee. You have anything further to add, Brandon? No? Okay. All right. Mr. Talowski, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, you gave the applicant ample opportunity to request a deferral, which in my mind he should have accepted. We cannot approve variances when he's removing 2 of them, which would require wholesale changes to the drawings. And even with the variance that remains on the table, I agree with planning staff. This is over a 500 square foot variance, and the design of the dwelling makes absolutely no attempt to mask the massing of that additional square footage. I do not believe it meets the intent of the zoning bylaw, and Madam Chair, I'm going to recommend this application be denied.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Talowski. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support of a denial? Okay. So your application has been denied. Okay, so we are at our final application of the night, the one for which everyone here is for Elmhurst, CAV 138 of 2018 at 2003 Elmhurst Avenue. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members. My name is Ida Evangelista, 53 Bentworth Avenue, Toronto.
Good evening, Ms. Evangelista. I'm going to canvass the room out of protocol. I know that most of the people in attendance here are for this application, but if you can bear with me.
Absolutely.
So, ladies and gentlemen, who is here for application CAV 138 of 2018 at 2003 Elmhurst Avenue? Can I see a show of hands? Thank you. Those of you in support, can I see a show of hands? Very well. And those of you who are in opposition, can I see a show of hands? Okay. The group that is in opposition, are you all going to address the committee, or do you have similar points of view and you've elected a spokesperson? There's 3 people who will address the committee. Very well, thank you. We'll let Ms. Evangelista take us through her application, and then I'll give you a chance to speak. Go Go ahead, ma'am.
I have the site plan up, so that's shown on each screen?
Yes. Oh, yeah, we got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm here on behalf of the Hughes. In October 2018, we received a deferral from this committee to allow us the opportunity to address staff's comments and concerns. Since then, we have diligently worked very closely with urban design and planning, who are in support of the application. We sat down with the various departments. They spoke, we listened, and went back to the drawing board, removed 4 variances, being height, dwelling depth, lot coverage, and a driveway crossing a flankage line. And we reduced the floor area to 34.53%. The front yard setback is technical in nature, as the measurement is taken perpendicular to the road, and as you can see, the lines that are drawn run along the side of the road. So because the road is not straight, so they do run perpendicular lines adjacent to the roadway, and they take it from the narrowest part. So that 9.66 reflects from the lot line perpendicularly, and it goes to the post of the canopy. However, in other areas, you have 10.43, you have 11.58 to the front door, excuse me, and you also have 13.56, sorry, 11.58 to the garage door and 13.56 to the front door. In relation to variance 1, both the floor area and lot coverage work hand in hand when looking at the scale and massing of a home. We do not have a lot coverage variance, and we have scaled the house down, the floor area of the house down to 34.53, which does add an additional 350 square feet. This is considered to be at scale, which is consistent and compatible with the surrounding area. The 350 square feet will be indiscernible from the street, and as the Sasseys mentioned, who reside at 2015 Elmhurst, they also stated in their letter that viewing from the street, it cannot be viewed. As you see from the rendering of the home, the house is both 1 story and 2 stories, which adds architectural interest to the home. As mentioned, the current design does comply with the maximum lot coverage, the side yard, rear yard, and at most, the front yard. Neighbors do have concern with the facade facing Elmhurst, and the Hughes will be working with the landscape architect to beautify and provide curb appeal. Per zoning bylaw 2014-014 RL1-0, the shorter of the lot lines is considered the front, and as such, on this particular lot, Maple Grove is the shorter of the lot lines, and that is being considered at the front. The Hughes will be working with a landscape architect to beautify and provide curb appeal. They are very open and receptive to creating and planting of trees along the Elmhurst facade. This is just an example of what the intent is, but they will be working very closely with a landscape architect. Staff has a vision for Oakville, and the Hughes are happy to be a part of that vision. The Hughes currently live in Oakville with their children and would like to continue to do so by building their forever home. This forever home will also be used as a multi-generational home. As their parents are aging, they will be living with them. This is an area, a neighborhood, a community they would like to be a part of, along with their many friends and family that currently live in the community. This area does consist of bungalows and 2-story homes, but as you can see from the photos, I've taken the liberty to take some photos of various homes in the neighborhood, and you'll see that this home does have characteristics of other homes in the neighborhood along Donnybrook, Maple Grove, Devon, Wedgwood, Constance, Hillhurst, and Acton. It will not destabilize the neighborhood. It allows a continued evolution of the area as the neighborhood and area is undergoing somewhat of a regeneration. The proposed variance will facilitate reinvestment in a manner that respects the planned contest and existing built form of the neighborhood. The proposed variances are minor and technical in nature and will be compatible to the surrounding homes. This application does meet the 4 tests. It is in keeping with the livable Oakville official plan and zoning bylaw. It is appropriate and desirable development for the area and minor in nature. And I would like to add that 459 Candler in July of 2015 received a 7% increase in floor area, and 452 Candler received an 8.89% increase in floor area. And as we have no lot coverage, and we have been working very closely with urban design, and we have met all of their criteria to have the home that you now have in front of you.
Very well, thank you, Ms. Evangelista. Any questions of Ms. Evangelista at this time? Mr. Charlebois?
Ms. Evangelista, could you put up that elevation again, the very first one?
The rendering?
Pardon me? Your elevation of your building, sorry, of your house. And
this one?
yeah.
Yes.
So you see to the, not the part that has the car, but the part to the right. That seems to be an area that not that one, so the other side of the building, which
yes.
I apologize, I forget which way it is on the compass.
Yes.
There seems to be a lot of controversy over that, and I'm trying to figure out a lot of the objections, from the written objections anyway, from the public as to that one encroaching as close as it does to Elmhurst. It looks from this elevation that it's not quite as tall as the rest of the building. Am I just not seeing that properly?
No, you are seeing it correctly, sir. This area is just one story. It's open to above.
Right.
It does not, as I had mentioned earlier, we do not have a side yard variance. And if we were as close as it was mentioned, we would definitely have a side yard variance. And I believe a lot of the controversy is because the home is facing Maple Grove.
There are some objections to that too. That's true. But this is specifically with respect to that. So that the height of that area there that's closest to Elmhurst is not at the. It was even difficult for me on the drawings to figure this out. It's not the same height as the remainder of the building. Is that true?
So.
Couldn't really tell from the drawings.
This is the area that you're referencing?
Right.
Okay. So that height is 7 meters.
Okay.
Okay.
And
then the height to the middle, which is this area here.
Right.
That's 9. So
okay.
that also complies. And then you have, because you'll see it's like it's tiered, right? There's many different. It's just to take away of that massing so that it's not as prominent.
Mm-hmm.
And then this area here is 8.6 meters.
Okay, so there is a section of the roof in behind there that does go back up to 8.6. So
right.
It's like, so okay, got it.
It tiers.
Okay, now I understand. Thank you.
Lisa, Mr. Tlowski, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. It would appear a majority of the residents have an issue with the siting of the building.
Right.
And when I look at the drawing, it would appear it's sited closer to Elmhurst than zoning would require. It looks like your interior side yard may be larger than the zoning minimum. Could you please explain sort of the rationale for the siting of the building? Because what I'm getting from the residents' letters is how far in front of the rest of the houses on Elmhurst this building sits, and it looks from the drawing that you provided that it would be possible to move that further north. Can you just explain the rationale for why you cited the building the way you have, please?
So we've cited it as such to have as minimal impact on Mr. Abrahams on Maple Grove and Mr. and Mrs. Sassy, the home behind it, 2015. And we don't, and another, speaking to why we're tearing back the house, right? So that it's not one big, when you're looking at the house, you'll see different levels of the home. You won't see this massive block. So it'll add some interest. And it won't be negatively impacted. Mr. Hugh did speak to Mr. Sassy. He is okay with the application as it is and as it's in front of him. We've tried, because if we push it back and over, I believe that would be more of an impact, because if I'm not mistaken, they have a pool in the back, and that would be less of a privacy for them, and it would be more impactful on Mr. Abrahams.
Any further items of clarification? Okay, so Ms. Evangelista, I'll invite you to sit down and we'll take the comments from the neighbors. Who would like to start? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Bill Dobson. I live at 2016 Elmhurst Avenue.
Sorry, can you repeat your last name?
Dobson, D-O-B-S-O-N.
Dobson, okay, Mr. Dobson. We have you here on the petition. Go ahead, sir.
Just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to speak and participate in a democracy. I will be reading from my prepared statement.
Very well.
My name is Bill Dobson. I live at 2016 Elmhurst Avenue, across the street and kitty corner to the property in question. I would first like to say that our neighborhood is a friendly place to live and raise a family, and those of us who are neighbors to this property have all been eagerly looking forward to someone developing this particular property, and we look forward to welcoming and getting to know any new neighbors. Since the Verys, the longtime original owners of this property, sold their home a number of years ago, the property has become a neighborhood eyesore. Whoever bought the property from the Verys did not maintain the property, and it became somewhat of a zombie house. So we all look forward to a new owner building a home on this lot. That being said, I have two concerns about the current plan for the new house and the request for a variance. The first is a safety concern. My house is the second house in from the corner on the south side of Elmhurst. At present, I need to be very careful backing my car out of my driveway, as this corner can be quite busy and cars coming south on Maple Grove, turning onto Elmhurst, can appear quite quickly, and I've had some close calls. The size and position of the proposed new house, being 22 feet closer to the street, will significantly alter and reduce the sight line, making it even more difficult to anticipate traffic coming around that corner. There is also currently no street light at that corner, so it is very dark at night, making the corner even more dangerous at nighttime. School children also ride their bikes along that part of Elmhurst on their way to the local schools, so they would also be faced with the same difficulty in anticipating cars coming around that corner if the proposed house is built according to its current plan. My second concern is with the precedent that will be set by allowing such a large structure to be built on a small corner lot. Square footage limits for houses are set in the town's bylaws for a purpose, and apparently the maximum allowed for this property is 4,750 square feet, and with a full basement would allow for over 7,000 square feet of livable space. That seems to me like a very generous allowance under the current bylaw, and should be more than enough floor space for the needs of almost any family. Accepting variances outside these limits could create a precedent for building even more mega homes, not just in our neighborhood, but in neighborhoods throughout Oakville, potentially changing the character of the town. The proportion of house size to property sizes in Oakville is what allows for the trees and shrubs and lovely gardens and green spaces that give Oakville its aesthetic charm. Allowing oversized houses to be built all over Oakville could end up robbing us of the aesthetic appeal that makes Oakville such a special place to live. I am not against larger homes being built in Oakville, as the town already has many very large, lovely houses built on appropriate sized lots in appropriate locations that also add to the beauty and charm of the town. But I question the wisdom of allowing an oversized house to be built on a busy corner and feel that the bylaw's allowance for 4,750 square feet home being built on this lot with the potential for over 7,000 square feet of livable space is already quite generous and is likely close to 3 times the size of the existing dwelling. A splendid home could be built on this property by staying within the town's very generous current size restrictions. Thank you.
Mr. Dobson, hang on for a quick moment. Are there any questions of Mr. Dobson at this time? I see none. Oh, you do? Okay, Mr. Charlebois, go ahead.
Just for the record, Madam Chair, I do happen to know Mr. Dobson on a personal note, but I don't feel there's any pecuniary interest here.
Very well.
The question I have for you, sir, is we're talking about a variance of on the residential floor area of roughly about 350 square feet, and your concern seems to be that the building's like 22 feet closer in. If the applicant was to comply with the 350 square feet, I don't have the exact math here, they would carve off a little bit of it, you know, assuming that they took it off that side. If they did that, would you be happy then with this particular design?
I'm not an architect, so I don't know exactly how you'd sort of jig that. But the main concern is just the fact that it's on a corner lot on a busy corner, and there could be sort of safety concerns. That was my main concern.
I'm assuming the building's probably about 90 feet long, and so if you cut it in, you take about 4 feet off at the most in there.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're looking for? If they did that, then I'd be happy with it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I did the math actually for you. 410 meters squared is 4,416 square feet, and 442 meters squared is actually 4,766 square feet. So we're talking a difference of about 350 square feet for the entire home.
Right.
Which is
on both floors.
one room. If we put it all in one space, it's one room.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
But divided on 2 floors, it's
175 feet.
Yeah.
So 2
I was
feet.
more concerned with the position and the location, just with, again, because I have to back out of my driveway. It's tricky now because cars come around, whip around that corner pretty quickly, and I'm pretty sure the sight lines will be reduced significantly by the position, that the fact that it's 22 feet closer to the road and a much bigger house than what's there now. So.
Okay. Good, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Good evening. Hello, Madam Chairman and board members. My name is Sean Leland.
Leland?
Leland.
Leland,
Yes.
okay, thank you.
My wife and family live and I on at 2004 Elmhurst, directly across the street from 2003. In considering this application, in my own personal way, I took some time to do some measurements, walk across the street, check the perspective that I might have from a house that is large, and how it might appear in my view. And it certainly will be a dominant feature. As I stand in my front doorway, I would reckon that the house is approximately, give or take, 150 to 175 feet from my front door. I'm also located about 4 to 5 feet lower down at the elevation level that that house is currently. The current house, and I assume that'll be a similar elevation, which gives me an interesting view of a potentially tall house. That said, you know, I was prepared to say that mitigation of views is a matter of landscaping. And what I've heard just a few minutes ago is that there's efforts have been made to accommodate substantial landscaping to obviously benefit the house, benefit the homeowner, and of course improve the neighborhood and generally make it a desirable, more desirable home. So that perhaps, I mean, I like the only items I was going to mention were of substantial height, that they could be visible and actually sort of balance the house out as well. And that there are about 3 mature trees, I believe, present on the property at the moment. And I'd obviously prefer to see them remain. The other topic I was going to talk about was simply the 350 square feet, the variance about size. And I had not heard any particular reason for this variance. I have now heard something of that. And I think in my changing knowledge of this situation, I would say that my concern is about the process that occurs, that I think basically the house is large enough, to put it to a bottom line, and that additional square footage will be enhance the massive, in the general use of the term, scale of the house. I think it is discernible. I think it would be nice to see it fit within the mode. My ultimate bias is about using variances as opposed to bylaws for determining the how designs are arrived at. So that would be ultimately my bias. Is I think the bylaw is adequate the way it is. And I think that's my only comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Mr. Leland at this time? I see none. I had a question for you. You
Yes.
mentioned the height. Were you speaking of the height of the home or the height of the trees?
Well, I was speaking of both initially. The height, from my perspective, is obviously, I'm looking at it from the south. I'm looking at it from a lower elevation, and it's quite tall. And therefore, I'd like whatever landscaping is in the current trees that are there to be a reasonable height, so they sort of balance the impression left.
I'm sure Ms. Evangelista will comment on that concern, but rest assured there are no height variances that have been applied for this application. So they're well
I
within
see.
their
Yes.
bylaw permitted height for the home.
Oh, sure. I'm not, but the mass of the
And they
house-
are within their rights to build 2 stories. Unfortunately, with the areas that have bungalows, we can't dictate that they cannot build because it's as of right.
Well, I'm living in a 1.5 story, or
So
whatever
there
we
you
call
go.
that.
There you go. Okay, all right. If there are no questions of Mr. Leland at this time, thank you for your submission, sir. I'll invite the next member of the audience to speak.
Okay.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Jan Dobson.
We have your letter on
Can you
hand.
hear me?
Yes.
I live at 20116 Elmhurst Avenue. And prior to me discussing what I'd like to say, I just want to mention to the members here that my husband, Bill, is very hard of hearing. And when you asked him the question regarding if the 350 square feet could be used to push the house back from Elmhurst, would he be okay with that? He didn't understand what you said. So I figured that was the case because I asked him and he said, oh yeah, that would be fine. So just so you know, that's what his response.
So I take it that would not.
He would be fine
would be
with
fine.
if the reduction of 350, i.e. if the removal of the RFA percentage, variance was removed, and in doing so, pushing the house back from Elmhurst, he would be happy with that. So, but he didn't hear everything you said.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, so anyways, that's him. Now me. Thank you so much for offering me this opportunity to address my thoughts and concerns as they relate to this application for 2003 Elmhurst Avenue. I live across the street from the property in question and kitty corner to it. From our living room window, we have full view of the house and property, and I've resided at this home for over 20 years now, and I very much enjoy our Elmhurst Avenue neighborhood and feel very blessed to count myself one of its neighborhood community members. I would like to state that since this application for variance was first brought to my attention back in mid-October 2018, when the Committee of Adjustment mailed out notices of this application, I have not been contacted by the owner or his representative by phone, email, snail mail, or simply by knocking on my front door to discuss his plans and intentions. And it wasn't until late yesterday afternoon that his representative, Ida, to my right, phoned me. A rather last-minute attempt to contact members who are so directly affected by this application is really not acceptable. However, Ida, I did appreciate our call and our chat, and I thank you for that. A petition to deny the two variances has been signed by 14 neighborhood residents and submitted to this committee. The general feeling is simply that this house is just too big in size, scale, and massing to sit on a small corner lot. It appears like a square-pegged house trying to fit into a very small round peg. The proximity of its south wall facing Elmhurst Avenue, which is here, pictured here, has brought this house a whopping 22 feet closer to the street, which places it well beyond the existing front yard setbacks of the existing homes on the north side of Elmhurst that are adjacent to it. Changing the orientation of this house on this lot has resulted in a change of lotting pattern, which takes away from the original intent and design and planning of the original 1953-55 streetscape plan, and is most undesirable. This positioning too close to Elmhurst Avenue, particularly for those who face this home and have to view it from their living room windows, whether they like it or not, is unacceptable. There seems that no consideration for neighbors' views who face this property has been taken into the planning of this home. With the drastic grade changes in drainage, which hopefully will not have a negative impact on killing the tall, mature blue spruce tree that sits majestically on the south side of the property, as well as the addition of a walkout from the basement. This south-facing wall, which we have here to view, now results in the appearance of a massive 3-story-foot house from my vantage point, and you can see the 3 stories, the basement windows. To mitigate the negative effects of this view for neighbors, I would like to ask that the side yard setback be increased to more better align with the existing front yard setbacks of the homes on the north side of Elmhurst, and that a comprehensive and full landscape plan incorporating 6 trees of a minimum of 20 feet in height be planted, along with the lower line evergreen shrubs, to screen the view of this wall from the neighbors' front yard and living room views. The closeness of this house to Elmhurst Avenue also have raised a number of traffic concerns by neighbors, which my husband pointed on to some degree. I have listed a number of reasons why I object to the variances in this application in the documentation I have submitted to the members of the COA to review on this case. I do not wish to repeat them, but I want to just highlight a few. First, I would like to point out that the existing bungalow home is likely around maybe 1,600 to 1,700 square feet, and the current bylaw permits a house of a maximum of 4,750. This means that the home is now approximately 3,100 square feet larger than the existing home. That's a 188% increase in square footage, all allowed within the existing bylaw. The applicant is asking for a variance to further increase the residential floor area ratio by another additional 350 feet, which we've talked about. Limits were assessed by the planning department and passed by town council, and these limits are there for a reason and should be abided by, especially to keep large homes such as this home in question, which are too big for their lot size, being built on small corner lots. Any design of two-story home situated in the midst of a mainly bungalow neighborhood must mitigate its impact by incorporating design qualities and setbacks that are aligned to minimize its size and massing on the lot. The dwelling has a mass and scale that is much larger than the surrounding homes and is an obvious fact to anyone who has eyes to see. The house does not maintain the character of our neighborhood. It's not compatible in size, form, height, architectural character, building elements, and materials. The scale of this home is not in scale or proportion to the existing many bungalow homes in the surrounding area. New development should not have the appearance of being substantially larger than the existing homes in the immediate vicinity. This home is much larger than the homes in the neighborhood. Its design has created a massing that is not an attractive feature. In response to the planning department's report, I would like to say I do not see how this revised plan now incorporates, quote, single-story elements which do not make the dwelling visually appear larger than the surrounding homes. It is larger than the surrounding homes. I disagree that this house maintains any way the character of the neighborhood. How does the planning department come to this conclusion? And lastly, how can the planning department say it has no negative impacts to its neighbors when for all homes facing and abutting this property, there are some negative impacts for all? And lastly, I would like to say the application has elements in it that I feel need to be discussed with the COA, Departments of Planning and Zoning, as well as the Town Council, because the issue of a corner lot orientation changing does indeed have significant negative impacts on all neighbors in the neighborhood. What bylaw exists to protect neighbors from the repositioning of a corner lot home, which now creates a significant negative impact on the streetscape design and to the surrounding neighbors? Without question, the proposed change in repositioning of the 2003 Elmhurst Tower home will have negative impacts on my home and my neighbors' homes who now face this property. Our view will be drastically changed and the subsequent value of our home will be lowered due to the town planning department allowing this change of home orientation to be accepted. It does not seem fair or reasonable that an owner can change the positioning of a home to increase its proximity to the original front streetscape and lotting plan, to the degree of now allowing it to be 22 feet closer to Elmhurst Avenue.
Ms. Dobson, you've exceeded your 5 minutes, so I'll give you another 15 seconds and then we'll have to end your submission.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I just hope at the end of all this that we as a town review this, because I think we want to have happier neighborhoods. It's not just the corner of Elmhurst and Maple Grove that are issue here. There's every corner lot and everywhere in Oakville that's being turned around and changed, and people like us who sit and we're facing the front of a home or now sit facing a home that's a side view and it's now pushed way out front. I don't think that was the intent for the original bylaw, and it shouldn't be the intent of the bylaws today. So with this loop, as I call it, in the bylaw, I think it should be plugged. I don't think that corner lot homes should be allowed to change their orientation like this. I just don't feel it's proper, because you just disrupt a neighborhood when people have bought their homes accordingly, knowing that all the homes were facing the front yard and now someone's faced with something very different. So I do hope that the town council and departments can discuss this. Personally, I think if the owner was able to reduce and remove his variance for the additional 350 feet for the residential floor area, put in landscaping that without question makes a significant screen for us all, that I think we would be happy with the application as is. with the variance he wants to have for the front yard setback. So that's how I feel anyways. I think it should stay within the limits of what the town right now currently has as the maximum.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dobson. Are there any questions of Ms. Dobson at this time? Go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle.
Thank you, Ms. Dobson. In your written materials and in your comments, you spoke about traffic safety and about reduced sight lines, my phrasing, but challenges with the building being so close to Elmhurst, affecting the visibility. But then later in your correspondence, you speak to putting substantive landscape screening in front of the building on Elmhurst, both high and low vegetation. Do you think that would exacerbate the condition in terms of the safety concerns if the building is blocking sight lines for pedestrians, cyclists, and so on? Do you think that there's a bit of a conflict there?
Well, I think that if the trees are high enough and the canopies are high enough, and the tulip tree is a wonderful tree that the town loves because it kills pollution, and it's your #1 top tree of choice. I know that is speaking here. So that's an upper canopy, which, you know, cars are not going to be obstructed in their view when you see a trunk, but the tree's canopy's above it. But it certainly helps our perspective by not having to see the height of this here.
Because you had spoken about tall trees as well as low-lying evergreen vegetation, so that's where I was trying to understand.
And if the low-lying vegetation is brought closer to the home, then I don't think it should be a problem. Okay. It's when everything is getting, you know, further out that I think really do need to have some concern. And to be honest with you, where is a major concern? It's right at that corner. It's very close to that corner. So it's the ability to turn around and see someone coming around. So I think the real corner of that lot needs to be, you know, viewed with that safety in mind. But the fact that it's such a large facility that is so close to Elmhurst, I just think it will create some difficulty, as I know my husband brought that point up.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I see none. Okay, thank you, Ms. Dobson. We appreciate your submission. Mr. Hassan, the corner street allowance, I don't know it off the top of my head, but is that applied to the residential corner lots where you have the corner allowance for traffic, or is that only for commercial lots?
Yeah. Through Madam Chair, are you speaking in regards of the front yard setback definition or how sightlines are measured?
No, the sightlines, I know from back when we looked at a commercial site, for example, on Great Lakes, there was a mandatory corner allowance in order for the traffic to turn and so forth. Does that apply to residential homes as well?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, that would be reviewed through the development engineering site plan review based on the proximity of the intersection to a proposed driveway. Those sightlines would be checked based on a certain distance in the engineering guidelines.
Okay, so the fact that nothing has been mentioned in this report with that respect means that they have met all these stipulations.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, and I guess further to that, through the rendition and review of the original proposal from October, the driveway that was proposed off Elmhurst would not have been supported by engineering staff, so that was removed.
Very well, thank you. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle.
Thank you. That just raised a point that maybe I'd like to have clarification from staff. The right-of-ways, the intersection of the right-of-ways for Elmhurst and Maple Grove both incorporate a daylighting triangle, correct? Is it a 7.5 meter daylight triangle? Are you aware? But the daylight triangle purpose is, maybe you could provide some clarity with respect to the utilization of a daylight triangle.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, to the committee, daylight triangles would be obtained through the previous subdivision process. I'm not too sure if this drawing depicts it correctly. The town at this point in time would have acquired that daylighting triangle, but it is for a safe line of sight at a corner intersection.
So these have been applied, just for the knowledge of the public as well. Thank you. Ms. Evangelista, there's one more resident who would like to speak. I believe he's actually speaking in support.
My apologies.
Sure. I apologize. We'll give them time to wrap up, and then I will. Sure.
All right. My name is Elizabeth Chalmers. I live at 121 Digby Road in Oakville. I'm not a neighbor. I'm speaking here tonight. I'm a member of the Joshua Creek Residents Association Board, and we were included on communication between the neighbors. I didn't send anything to you, as I only decided yesterday that I would come in to do the speaking. The JCRA's overall direction is that development should be within the zoning bylaws or within the governed development, except for extenuating circumstances. We're speaking tonight with the aim of preserving the streetscape and the character of the neighborhood. We're not speaking for or against any property owner. We're not against any property development that is consistent with the character of the neighborhood. The minor variance requests on this property will result in massing in scale that is not consistent with the neighborhood. The zoning allowances are set to ensure that properties are developed within the existing neighborhood character. They're not set so low as to encourage minor variance requests, and they're not set so high as to create massing. Both these variance requests are significant, as their impact is to create massing and scale beyond what is permitted by the zoning. It's not correct to assume or to claim that they don't make any difference, that they have no significance, that they're not noticeable. They do make a difference. They will be noticeable. If they didn't make a difference, there wouldn't be a request, because you wouldn't put in a request for something that didn't impact or have any property. The zoning does permit a 4,750 square foot house. So building the house within that zoning will ensure that the massing and the scale of the home is appropriate for the lot size, and it ensures that the property is developed in the manner that is consistent with the existing neighborhood character and streetscape. You've had some discussion about the southeast wall that the former front yard, now the side yard, did not address that. It's permitted within the zoning bylaw to do that. We've heard some discussion tonight. I recognize that it's not the scope of this committee to talk about that and decide that, and so something for town staff. But you did mention earlier in one of the comments that 350 square feet isn't that much. It's really just one room. It's a large room if it's just one room. But you also asked if, I think the earlier neighbors, would they find it more acceptable if that 350 square feet was not accepted and was taken out of the side? And maybe that would be the appropriate thing to do to manage the situation. You also asked about moving the house back a little bit towards the east, towards the Sassy property. And I think you're the architect here, mentioned that it might impact their pool, but their pool is actually on the far east side of their property. And moving it back that 1.5 meters instead of taking that in the front yard, I don't see that it would impact their backyard or their privacy or their enjoyment of their property. And so maybe those are two ways to manage it so that we have more accord and harmony. So anyway, that's our concern is really primarily with the ensuring that the massing and the scale is appropriate to the streetscape in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chalmers. Are there any questions of Ms. Chalmers at this time? I see none. Thank you. We appreciate your submission. Lastly, but certainly not least, the gentleman in support. Your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Don Sassy.
Oh, good evening. You do have your letter on hand.
Thank you. Address is 2015 Elmhurst. Thank you again for sticking around here a little bit later, I guess, than usual. As my letter states, I am in support of this. One of the mitigating factors that I think would appease, at least from my perspective and my family's perspective, is just dealing with the landscaping along Elmhurst Avenue. Whatever, again, I think in a lot of these situations, reasonableness is what should prevail. And whatever the committee would think is reasonable in terms of mitigating what some suggest to be massing, whether you adhere to the suggestion I put in there of 15 to 20 foot cedar hedges along Elmhurst, or we look at trees. But I think In speaking with the owner and looking at it from our perspective, that would mitigate that so-called massing. Again, that is within the bylaw, right? There is no issues, and we shouldn't even be discussing that at this point. I think if the owner does put the trees in there, that's really just because he's a nice guy, in my opinion. If we look at the facts and what we're looking at tonight, there's really two minor variances. And again, I always like to draw the attention to reasonability. Are we being unreasonable, or is the prospective build being unreasonable, asking for a 7% increase in the size of the square footage? If we look at it in the context of approximately 5,000 square foot home, I would struggle with that not being minor. And this is really what we're here for tonight, is to deal with minor variances. The procedures are in place for that. So I would think if I looked at a reasonableness test, 7% would fall into that category. If we look at the front setback, Ida here clearly pointed out that's the narrowest point, and it's 1.5 meters. And I would struggle, now I'm not in planning, but I would struggle to see that with the naked eye. And if I look at the people that are opposing this, as I mentioned in my letter, most of them can't even see the 1.5 meters as far as the distance is concerned. So the two minor variances, which is really what we're here for tonight, I think if we had to look at a reasonableness, 7% in terms of a square footage is reasonable and minor in my opinion. And if we look at in the grand scheme of that home, if you haven't already, the house next door, which is my house, is just under 5,000 square feet. The house next door is 5,000 square feet, actually more than that. And if you look at just behind us on Malbrook, there's probably 4 homes that are over 5,000 square feet. So it's not out of character with the neighborhood whatsoever. If you look on Elmhurst, 6 houses down, there are homes that are 9,000 square feet. So asking for 350 square feet extra, if you want to use that terminology, in my opinion, is extremely reasonable and does fall into minor. In terms of the traffic concern, I would be of the opinion that removing the driveway that's there now and having it on Elmhurst actually is a positive for safety. Currently, if you are on the other side of Elmhurst, you have to deal with a car that's coming in and out, cars that park along Elmhurst. We don't have to deal with that anymore. So it's actually, from my perspective, it's actually a positive. So if I look at the 4 points that I addressed in my letter, the 2 issues of the minor variances, which is what we're here for tonight, I really don't see any issues there, and I would agree with you. Cheryl, is it Cheryl?
Mikhail, yeah, that's fine. Sherry's
okay.
fine.
Okay. That 350 square feet is minor at best, and I would challenge anybody to be able to notice that with the naked eye, sitting 200 feet away from that home. 2, if we put in some shrubs along Elmhurst, I would say really a non-event, but again, that's not even part of this evening because he's not out of variance. And number 3, traffic, it's actually a positive in my opinion. There's less cars going to be coming along that street. And to my friend, I guess Elizabeth Chambers, who doesn't even live in the neighborhood and who has made the assumption upon my lot that it really doesn't matter if it's closer, it actually does. We live there, she doesn't. And I would say where the house is right now is perfectly situated. There's nobody on the road. If we put it closer to my lot, I actually do have a deck there where we do eat. If you want to come and see it, you can come and see it. So it would actually impact me. So I would definitely take issue with that suggestion. That's all for me.
Thank you, Mr. Sassi. I appreciate your submissions. Are there any questions of Mr. Sassi at this time? I see none. Thank you. Ms. Evangelista, you have your work cut out for you. He will give you some time to respond to all the concerns of the neighbors, and then we'll take this matter into committee.
So one of the comments that was made was safety. So all the departments have received this application and have commented as they felt was necessary. And transportation have made no comments. There is a daylight saving triangle of 6.76, 6.76, and in that triangle, they really do not like any trees or shrubs there because of the safety issue. We are in the position, and as I have stated in my earlier submission, we're willing to work with the neighbors. We're willing to landscape the area. Like I said, the Hughes, this is their forever home. And this is also going to be a home that most likely their parents were going to be living with them. And for the size, I can't speak to style. I can't speak to the design because this is their style of home. This is what they choose. We all have our own taste. And for the Hughes, they love this style of home. And what we have done up to now is work very, very closely and diligently with urban design and planning. As you know, urban design and planning have a very vigorous procedure and standards on massing and scaling. And as far as they're concerned, we are now at a point where they are totally in agreement with what we have presented. Now, the one thing that optically at times throws people off, this is our lot line. So these measurements are to our lot line. However, the street is over here. So on top of this, there's probably another 20, 30 feet. So the house is set back quite a bit. It's not that the house is 5 meters away from the street. It's set back substantially. Now, this area here, we will be working with a landscape architect to have, to have low shrubs, to have some canopied trees, something that will complement the home and complement the neighborhood. We're willing to work. When I was speaking to Jan, she mentioned that she has a passion for horticulture. We have no problem sitting down talking to her and asking her what her suggestions are and moving forward. The safety issue, as Mr. Sassy said, having the driveway on Maple Grove, I believe, is much safer and better and feasible for the neighborhood. The home is further set back. You do not have a driveway on this side. It's off of Maple Grove. The sight lines are free and clear. We have the daylight saving triangle, so this area remains open. It is a fairly wide intersection. And I believe this home will be a great fit for the neighborhood. It will complement the neighborhood. Once they are finished with the home and with the landscaping, it will be a lot better and nicer than what is there now. And we do work very closely with staff to try to reach an agreement with what they feel that they want to see in Oakville. And the positioning of the home, again, to Mr. Sassy's point, the position of this home is much easier on the neighboring properties. It doesn't project and it doesn't negatively impact on the two neighboring homes.
Very well, thank you, Ms. Evangelista. Are there any questions of Ms. Evangelista at this time? I see none. If you are satisfied with the conditions of town staff, we are ready to take this matter into committee. Okay. I'll give the committee a minute. Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Corner lots are challenging to start with. I think that the way zoning bylaws set up with respect to how they identify the front lot line, and the relationship of the exterior side yard to the secondary road is always sets up for a challenging situation, and homes that are struggling to relate to the street but provide usable amenity areas within the backyards and mitigate negative impacts on adjacent properties associated with bringing two-story built form immediately adjacent to backyard spaces. It really makes for a challenging situation in the best of times. And I think that overall, I think that the proposal in front of us has done a very good job in trying to balance some of those competing interests that come from being a corner lot. I think, well, the house is located closer to Elmhurst than it would be if it were the front yard. The building design in utilizing a number of different roof planes and front facade planes does a great job in breaking down the mass of the building on that side. I think that some of the comments that we heard with respect to safety concerns on sight lines, I don't find them to be particularly compelling. I think that the right-of-way is designed in such a way, including the daylight triangle, to protect for the kinds of sight lines that we're talking about that are necessary to ensure the protection of both the motoring and active public. I think that the owner has expressed some willingness to work in terms of softening the edge of that building along the Elmhurst frontage by utilization of a multitude of different landscape treatments. So I'm not particularly concerned with respect to the placement of the building. I think that the design of the building has done a good job to break down the additional mass being proposed. I would also bring forward a comment with respect to one of what compatibility is about. Compatibility is not about consistency in architectural design or consistency in certain types of elements in terms of setbacks or what have you. It is about working in concert with or not posing negative impacts upon adjacent properties. And I think that the measures that have been undertaken in terms of the design of the building, the placement of the building, mean that there are minimal impacts in tangible negative impacts on adjacent properties, things like overlook or shadowing and things like that. As such, and based upon those comments, I will be putting forward a motion of approval of this application, finding that the requested variances conform to the 4 tests of the Act. And the motion should be subject to 2 conditions. The first being that the dwelling be built in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevations dated January 7th, 2019, and that our standard condition with respect to the 2-year expiration of a building permit has not been issued. I would note that there were several members of the public present, and they spoke passionately about their community, but I do believe that that the design, the staff report, and the comments from the applicant largely address the concerns, at least to my satisfaction.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? Mr. Tlowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I agree with a number of the things my colleagues said. However, I'm going to take a completely opposite view on this one. I have no doubt that a house could be built here that meets every requirement of the zoning bylaw, and it would not satisfy the neighbors in terms of the impact that they would perceive. But the applicant isn't complying. The applicant's come to the committee looking for relief from the bylaw, and I believe when you're looking for relief, you have an obligation to try the best to mitigate and make things fit in. I can find in favor of 3 of the 4 tests, but the choice that the applicants made here in terms of design and siting on the lot, I cannot find that the end product is in any way desirable. And when I say design, I don't mean the style of the house, I mean the actual design of the house. I'm left with the impression that the house was designed and then placed on the lot, as opposed to designing a house that actually fit compassionately onto this lot. So even though the variance was requested, I find to be minor, when I put them together with the siding and the design, which in my view does not make efficient use of the lot and leaves a lot of room to the north behind the garage that could have been used to design a house that made better use of that space, and then I wouldn't have an issue with this, but I just find this to be a house that's been designed and placed on the lot to suit the applicant, and in my opinion it's not desirable, so I will not be supporting the approval.
Thank you, Mr. Tulowski. Are there any further discussions on this matter? Go ahead, Mr. Charlebois.
Sounds like this one is interesting. Who to side with? You know what? This is a difficult one, and I'm looking at it. When I drove around the neighborhood, one of the things I did notice is that in almost all the corner lots, there were substantial setbacks, whether it was from the front yard or the side yard. And so I came in here with a little bit of a negative aspect towards it. I have to admit that the presentation from Ms. Evangelista was good, and taking into account the stuff from the neighbors, which I think was equally as good. The corner lot problem and the orientation, whether I agree with it or not, as has been pointed out here, is not what's in front of this committee. So there's no technical fault in reorienting the building, but I totally get how it impacts it. I mean, I'm sitting here visualizing that if we actually push, use the front yard as Elmhurst, then technically the building could be pushed very close to Maple Grove, and then I'm sure the people along Maple Grove wouldn't like it. And using that as a segue to everything else, if we push the building a little bit further east or west or whatever, there was always going to be another neighbor that's probably going to say this is impacting on me. So when I looked at all of this thing, I realized it was coming down to what the stuff that Mr. Tulowski was pointing out, which was we've got an application in front of us here looking for a variance. I too agree that this particular building doesn't seem to fit. I think it could have been designed a little bit differently to make it to take into account the neighborhood. And on that basis there, even though I can't find a lot of technical reasons, I actually too support Mr. Tulowski in thinking that this particular design does not fit the neighborhood. I find them very influenced by the public in some of their in some of their submissions with respect to this. So I too won't be supporting it.
Thank you, Mr. Charlebois. Mr. Flemington.
Madam Chair, I guess I'd like to support the motion that's been moved. I think that a lot of the elements here are on design. I think that the square footage that we're down to, I believe, is minor in nature, in the sense that based on some of the sizes of the other properties that are within the neighborhood and in that area, I don't have an issue with it. I think that on the design aspect, reading through some of the comments of the neighbors with regards to the traffic, and that's been addressed as far as the daylight triangle. I agree with the one neighbor as far as the driveway being relocated to the other side may have a beneficial impact on the traffic. I note too, with regards to some of the comments from the written objections and some of the oral objections, with regards to the number of stories, well, if we reduce the square footage for variance 1, it still is going to have the 2 stories. I think that the application having been submitted originally and the work that has been done with regards to the height, the depth, the lot coverage, and the floor area being reduced, that the applicant has made some efforts in trying to work with the town and looking at the town's staff report in support of as well. I think that I support the motion that's on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Flemington. I too am in support of this application. I think both you and Mr. Hardcastle have addressed all of the concerns that we may have, and despite the feeling from the neighbors with respect to massing and impact on the community, excuse me, I too don't feel that there is an overall negative impact to the massing with respect to the small square footage that is asked of us in the variance. And with respect to the placement of the house, the configuration, as well as the size of the lot, I too feel that town staff and Ms. Evangelista have addressed the issues with respect to safety concerns, as well as the desire for further landscaping. I think if I've covered most of the points that were raised before us today, and I thank everyone for their submission and this respectful discussion that we've all engaged in. With that said, the motion before us right now is to approve the application with the set forth conditions as stated. All those in support? Okay, all those against? Okay, the application has been approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
You as well. Do we have minutes to move? Yes, it's here. We have minutes to move for January 15th. Mr. Hardcastle will move the minutes. Thank you. And motion for adjournment. Okay, Mr. Hardcastle moves to adjourn. Thank you. And our meeting has been adjourned at 8:44 p.m.